Brought to you by Charity Mobile, the phone company that supports life and family. 5% of your monthly plan price goes to your favorite charity. Buy the way you believe at CharityMobile.com and use promo code TRADITION.
Many observers have noticed that coming from Rome these days is a new gospel. And what is that new gospel? It is a materialist gospel. A gospel about being focused on the things of this world. Making a better world, a more just world. It is the gospel of activists. It is the gospel of politicians. And it is a false gospel. We expect better from Rome than that, but it is coming from Rome. And there is a surprising to some bishop who is become kind of front and center in recent days on this. And it's not an American. Plenty of American bishops have had strong opinions about President Trump and migration and all those other topics. We have a high-profile cardinal from Rome who recently retired. During his heyday, he was talked about seriously as a successor to and continuation of Pope Benedict XVI. He was thought that when Benedict resigned, he might be a contender to continue the work of John Paul II and Benedict XVI. This cardinal was closely aligned with them, ideologically and in terms of theology and the rest, until he shocked everybody by smoothly transitioning to a full-blown Bergoglian himself. This cardinal is the now well-known and possibly infamous Cardinal Cardinal Schönborn, who retired just weeks ago. And you would think that after retiring, he would maybe pen a book, give a couple public talks, and otherwise enjoy the life of a retired octogenarian. But no, he has instead delved into the world of politics, joining the chorus of bishops and cardinals who have criticized the American president for his policies on the subversion of social stability here. And it's perfectly in line with Francis and the American bishops and their money-focused concern on that issue. They talk a good game about being concerned about human dignity. At the end of the day, it's all about money. We go here to cath.net, sort of life site news of Germany and Austria, for this headline. How a cardinal mutates into a left-wing politician. That's a heck of a statement to come from a fairly moderate, kind of conservative news outlet in the Catholic Church, one that never raises any questions about the validity of Francis, delves its foot into any of the more radical topics, but still defends life and dignity and all the rest, all the things you would want a Catholic news outlet to do. Mutates into a left-wing politician. That is a heady statement to dissuade for applying to Cardinal Schönborn, unless you know that Schönborn became a full-throated Bergoglian and defended virtually everything Francis did. Came down against anybody who had anything harsh to say about Francis and his program. This is the kind of thing we deal with in the Catholic Church every day from the likes of Supich and McElroy and all the rest of them in America. Cardinal Schönborn is not an American, and yet he has a lot to say about the church in America, and especially about the new American president, and that hot topic issue of migration that has dominated the news cycle recently. So go to the article for all the illustrious details. And remember, just because a cardinal's retired does not mean he's actually retired. It just means his mission has changed. And this mission, he believes, is to be an evangelist for the false gospel of materialism. From the article, quote, is a new career opportunity on the horizon for the Archbishop Emeritus of Vienna. He has only just been sent into retirement by the Pope, and his former flock is already reading astonishing things about the USA's customs policy. Of course, everyone, including a Cardinal Emeritus, can and should comment on issues of public interest. One such issue is certainly the new government of the USA, still the leading world power and thus of lasting importance for us here in Europe. You might think a cardinal would applaud the Trump administration's massive steps to roll back the woke left-wing cultural revolution. You might expect him to enthusiastically point out that the new Trump administration is banning the ideology of the flesh in all public institutions. After all, the Pope had called the ideology of the flesh diabolical. You might also expect a cardinal to point out the Trump administration's anti-Moloch measures. After all, the USA is currently leaving the World Health Organization and its program for planning the limits of how many people can be alive, and is closing USAID, which spent over $800 million on the sacrifice to Moloch worldwide in 1 year alone. Wasn't opposition to that topic an important issue for the church, and hadn't the same cardinal lamented his own failures in this area in the media? One would expect that the cardinal, as a defender of women, would loudly support the ban on those who are confused about the reality of the flesh. But far from it. Cardinal Schönborn does not address any of these topics, but rather comments on international contract law and customs policy in a commentary for the newspaper Hewitt, which is far outside his theological expertise. Wouldn't that require a lawyer and an economist? Wouldn't these two then feel equally called upon to answer moral theological questions, or would they rather stick to what they do? One could also ask questions about the content that the cardinal probably missed. For example, are some of the contracting parties still fulfilling their contractual obligations, such as Panama, which allows Chinese port operators to control the entry and exit of the canal at the mouth of the Panama Canal, which was built by the USA and then given as a gift to Panama, which incidentally owes its entire independence to the USA alone, and in doing so is clearly breaking the contract with the USA. Or look at the World Health Organization and USAID, which are breaking their statutory duties and pursuing left-wing ideological goals. Why, for example, is it an aid project for the poorest when international media are paid millions so they can do opposition work against their elected governments? Or should we not look at whether the USA's tariff threats are often used as a negotiating tool to obtain concessions from the other side, such as from Mexico, so that the country finally monitors its own border and thus stops the illicit bringing into the USA of controlled substances? Should we resort to force instead of tariff policy? Would the cardinal prefer that? All of these and other substantive questions could and should be asked if one wants to deal with such topics seriously. This requires vision, expertise, and a positive attitude. The Archbishop Emeritus of Vienna seems to lack all three, at least on this topic, and so he still tries to lead his former flock with a sharp pen, but unfortunately he leads them astray. The old saying remains, if he had kept quiet, he would have remained a philosopher. That is a humorous piece, I think, and quite frankly, the whole point of that is you'll see in this migration discussion the strangest rhetoric used by church officials. Life and death. Existential. Millions will perish. That's the language they use. These topics are all about nuance. The Panama Canal one is an excellent example of this. The United States built the Panama Canal, and to do so helped modern country of Panama gain independence. And part of that deal was the U.S. would build the canal, and the canal would be operated as U.S. territory. Several thousand Americans gave up their lives to build the canal. It was sold by Jimmy Carter for $1 to the Panamanian government. And part of that treaty was they would have to operate it in a way that did not conflict with U.S. national security interests. So now fast forward 40 years, and what do you have? You have the Chinese running it. You see the problem here. There's nuance to this, to all things, but typically the media does not recognize nuance. And it's really odd to see a cardinal of the church commenting on these things without using nuance and instead invoking kind of scary examples from world history as his example of how things are so concerning in America. Meanwhile, for a lot of Americans who aren't on the left, it looks like normalcy has resumed in America after 4 to 8 years of just weirdness. Now, how long that'll last for is anybody's guess. I make no promises there. And truly, I say to you, if you want a real conversion of the culture, real normalcy restored, the only way that's going to happen is through the evangelization of the culture, spreading the gospel to your neighbors, getting them to go back to church when they stopped going to church several years ago, maybe decades ago. It will only happen if the culture bends the knee to Christ the King. That's the only way it's going to happen, folks. You and I know that, even if we don't want to admit it. There's only so much an elected politician can do. But I'm curious what you think about this. Are you surprised that Cardinal Schönborn is getting in this? It's not that surprising that the American bishops are. Or that even Pope Francis last week, hammered on J.D. Vance with that letter of his. None of that is that surprising. But cardinals, other than that, getting involved in this, that is a bit surprising, at least to me. But I'm curious what you think about this. Let me know in the comments, please. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't. It certainly helps. Let us sharing this on social media. That helps too. And as always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.